I was struggling to stay awake. We had been driving through the night. "Can we stop somewhere?" I kept nodding off, and he's already out. I yawned. We were on our way home from visiting our parents. Jess and I grew up next to each other. Our parents were neighbors, and we hadn't seen them in a while. Two problems had come up though. First, they thought it would be a good idea to send us home with Jess's younger brother, Joey. Joey was about 10 years younger than us. Our parents lived the next state over, and so we didn't see them a lot, and they thought Joey might like to spend a week with us before the next school year started. And second, because our parents lived so far away, Jess thought that it would be a good idea to drive through the night instead of stopping to stay somewhere. She was certain we would stop at some little bed and breakfast and get murdered halfway through the night. Well, it was a good idea, until about 2 hours into the drive. Joey was getting restless and he started complaining. Now he was passed out on the back seat, and I was envious. I had promised Jess that I would stay awake and keep her entertained and awake while she drove us all home. But now we had been stuck in the car for a total of 8 hours, and it was starting to take its toll. Actually, yeah, that's a good idea. We can stretch our legs, and I'm sure Joey will need to use the bathroom. Jess smiled at me. The sun was still rising, but even in the dim light, she looked like the most beautiful person that I had ever seen. Jess and I lived together. We had been best friends for as long as either of us could remember, and we were inseparable. So when the time came for us to move out, it only made sense that we would do so together. But over the last year, I realized my feelings had grown well past the platonic stage. But I was too afraid to tell her. Part of the reason I agreed to drive straight through the night was because I thought it might make it easier. Sometimes people opened up more during long car rides, and I thought the sleep deprivation might help too. I hadn't counted on Joey joining us though. "Steph, can you check and see if there's an exit coming up?" Jess asked me. "Yeah, sure." I pulled open the Maps app on my phone. "You should have an exit coming up in about 2 miles. It looks like there's a gas station and some restaurants, so we should be able to find a bathroom and get something to eat." "Are we there yet? My Switch is dead and my phone needs to charge." Joey stirred in the back seat, his voice heavy with sleep. "Almost. We're gonna take a quick stop to fuel up and get some food, and to go to the bathroom," Jess answered. In just a few minutes, we came upon the exit. Interestingly enough, the sign didn't specify which town the exit was for. The exit didn't even have a number, just a giant green sign that said, "Exit" with an arrow. Still, we turned off anyway, eager for a break. "It doesn't look like anything's open yet," I said as we cruised through town. It almost looked like a ghost town. There were a couple restaurants and stores, but they all looked dark. Aside from the streetlights, nothing was lit up. "There are other cars parked at some of these businesses on the street, and so I guess it isn't deserted," Jess said. "I guess we won't get murdered then," I laughed. "There's a park up ahead. Why don't we just pull off there? We can just hang out until something opens. Maybe there's a bathroom around too." "Hey, there's a river next to it. Can we go swimming?" Joey piped up, suddenly wide awake. "I don't think so. Sorry, bud. We don't know what's in there or if the water is safe," Jess answered. We pulled into a parking spot and we turned off the car. My legs were still from hours of sitting, and it was difficult to walk. Joey ran ahead to set up swings while I followed Jess down to the riverbank. We sat down in the grass and we stretched out our legs. "Hey, look at those mushrooms over there," Joey called. I could see him kicking at something. "They look weird." "Be careful," I called back. "You don't know what kind of mushrooms those are." "Sorry, I guess this wasn't the best idea," Jess said, smiling. Her smile was contagious, and it could light up any room. "No, you had the right idea," I answered. I was growing nervous. I was trying to work up the nerve to tell her how I felt. I couldn't tell her when we were in the car because Joey was there. But now he was trying to take a selfie while swinging, so he was preoccupied. "Yeah, I guess I just thought we'd be home by now." Jess yawned. She stretched again and laid back in the grass. A few minutes passed before I could manage to say anything. The sun was rising higher, turning the sky a mix of golden yellows and blues. "So listen," I started. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." I waited for an answer, but none came. I looked over to see that Jess had fallen asleep in the lush grass. I sighed and I stretched out next to her. It wasn't long before I fell asleep too. When I awoke, something was off. The sky rippled with deep purples and pinks. The sun had turned a bright maroon color. How long had we slept? Was the sun setting already? Did we sleep through the entire day? A breeze swept through, carrying on an acrid smell. I looked next to me, but Jess was gone. I stood up, looking towards the playground where Joey had been. The swings were still and motionless. Everything was a little too quiet. I realized that I could not hear the river flowing. Glancing back towards the river, I saw the water was black and unmoving. "Jess! Joey!" I called out, but no one answered me. I started to walk towards the swings when I noticed something. Scattered across the grass were little fluorescent mushrooms. The glowing fungi were a rainbow of colors. They seemed to be everywhere, especially on the edge of the playground. I wasn't sure what these mushrooms could do, if they were poisonous or not, so I was careful not to step on any of them. A couple yards away from the swing set, a body was lying on the grass. "Joey!" I yelled, rushing over to him. He seemed to be asleep. I tried shaking him, but he wouldn't stir. He was covered in what looked like mushroom spores. I managed to brush most of them off of him, trying as best as I could to avoid breathing any in. But still, he was fast asleep. I turned away from him. I would have to try to wake him up later, but for now, I needed to find Jess. The rest of the town was still dark, only lit by the streetlights. It looked like the shops were still closed, and I still hadn't seen anybody else here. The air in the town had a chemical, plasticky smell. Jess had said something about food and a bathroom. Maybe she had gone to a restaurant. The closest business was a diner, so I made my way there. I peered through the glass storefront, trying to see inside. It was dark, but I couldn't see anyone. I pulled on the door handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, it sprang open. "Hello?" I called out, but no one answered. I followed the signs to the restrooms, turning left into the woman's bathroom. "Jess?" Still no answer. I pushed all of the stalls in, wondering if she was hiding for some reason, None of the toilets had any water, but when you gotta go, right? When I finished, I tried to push the handle to flush, but it wouldn't move. Oops, I muttered to myself. I headed back into the seating area, and I decided to try the kitchen. It was dark without the glow of the outside street lamps, but trying the light switches did nothing. Jess, are you back here? I was starting to grow uneasy. I was all alone in a strange town and my friend was missing. I decided to give up on the diner and I went back outside. I decided to try the building next door. The windows were covered in old newspapers, too yellow and faded for me to make out anything that they might have said. I pulled one handle, but the door stayed firmly closed. I tried the other and it opened easily. Once again, the building was dark too. The newspapers let some light in, but not much. The air inside was stale, but it also had a plasticky tinge to it like the outside air. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, my blood ran cold. It was just a huge empty room, except for rows and rows of plastic mannequins. I hated mannequins. I had seen the Twilight Zone episode about the department store when I was a kid and it had traumatized me, leaving me with this silly, irrational fear. Their plastic heads were turned to face the door, all of their blank eyes trained on me. They were all bare. Some of them were missing heads, some were missing arms or legs, but even the ones that were just a torso creeped me out. Jess! I was starting to get impatient. I just wanted to get out of there. Being in a room full of these plastic freaks made me nervous enough. I was on edge, ready to turn and run out of the building at the slightest noise. Something fell and clattered to the floor towards the back of the room, and that was all it took. I turned and bolted out of the building, shutting the door tightly behind me. I tried to steady my breathing, but I thought my heart was going to pound right out of my chest. I felt dizzy from fear. After I put some distance between me and the building, I started to calm down. I could still feel their eyes watching me. I still didn't have a single clue where Jess could be. Maybe she went back to the car. My footsteps echoed in the silent town as I walked back towards the playground. The car was empty, except for Jess's phone and Joey's switch. I sighed and I ran my hand through my hair as another bad-smelling breeze wafted through. I decided to go check on Joey, still careful not to disturb any of the glowing mushrooms. I tiptoed back to where I had left him. When I caught sight of him, I gasped and I ran, forgetting my earlier cautiousness. Joey! Joey! I shouted at him, shaking him fiercely. He was still asleep, but the spores I had brushed off earlier had now grown into full-size mushrooms. Joey's skin looked gray and leathery. Wake up! My heart was racing and my hands were shaking. I tried again and again to rouse him. Finally, I brought one trembling hand up to his neck, searching for a pulse. His skin was cold and his heartbeat was missing. I backed away from him, feeling sick. My stomach felt heavy, and I could feel bile rising up in my throat. I turned away from Joey, stumbling to get away before falling to my knees and vomiting. I wiped my mouth and I stood up. Something caught my eye down by the river. Stepping closer, I could see that it was a figure. You shouldn't be here, Steph. As I stepped closer, I could see that it was a mannequin. Immediately, I stopped short, trying to keep as much a distance as I could. It looked like Frankenstein's mannequin, like someone had just randomly thrown the closest limbs on it. The body parts didn't match. One of the legs was on backwards and it had 2 left hands. It was bare of any clothing, but instead was covered in glowing mushrooms and spores. Its head was also on backwards, but as I tried to speak to it, its head spun quickly around to face me. "How do you know my name? Who are you? Where am I? Where is Jess? What happened to Joey?" I asked. "Too many questions," came the reply. I tried to get closer, but my unease held me back. "Where am I?" "Nowhere." "What?" Like the town is called nowhere, or I'm not in any place. I asked, bewildered. "Does it matter?" I was starting to realize that it didn't have one voice, but rather many voices speaking in unison. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter." "What happened to Joey?" I demanded. I wasn't getting any answers. "Joey's dead. I had a nice nap while the life was sucked right out of him." "What? What do you mean Joey's dead?" My legs felt weak, like they could give out at any moment. Still, something in the back of my mind already knew. It didn't answer me. "Where is Jess?" I asked. Lost. "Lost where?" But it didn't answer me. It just stood there. Fueled by my frustration, I dashed towards the mannequin. I was going to grab it and shake it until it gave me a viable answer. Before I could reach it, the mushrooms on the mannequin's head wiggled and it took a shaky, disjointed step towards me. Instinctively, I flinched and I shut my eyes. When I opened them, the mannequin was simply gone. I stopped and stared at the black river. It was so smooth that I wasn't even sure that it was filled with water, but I didn't want to risk going near it. Turning, I decided to follow the riverbank. I passed more buildings and houses, all still black. I anxiously looked up and down each street that I passed, eager to see a sign that somebody was there. Anybody. Eventually, I came to a small lumber mill. It looked like the sawmill was powered by the river's current, which I thought was odd. Wasn't there a more efficient way to cut lumber these days? There wasn't even a current in the river. Piles of cut wood were neatly stacked in front of the mill, but even those weren't free from the mushrooms propagating. I was starting to think the mushrooms were laughing at me, wandering around town like an idiot, getting spooked by mannequins. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I had breathed in those spores earlier. I reached out absent-mindedly to run my hand across some of the cut wooden planks as I walked along the mill. Putting my hand back, I frowned. I expected to brush some rough wood, maybe a prick or a splinter, but instead, the wood was smooth. I stopped and I tried to get a better look at the lumber. It was a normal walnut color, but the wood grain didn't look right, like it wasn't real. I placed my hand in the middle of the plank and I pressed down, expecting resistance. Surprisingly, my hand sunk as the wood gave way slightly. It was plastic. The wood wasn't wood at all. Frowning again, I stepped back. This was a lumber mill, but all the wood was plastic. That didn't make any sense. A motion caught my eye. Up in the mill, where I imagined the saw blade was, there was a figure. Its hair blowing in the wind was what had caught my attention. "Hey!" I yelled, running up into the mill. "Jess!" I stopped short. The figure had its back to me, but I could tell that it was Jess's hair. She was even still wearing the same clothes. "God, where have you been? I've been looking for you everywhere." I gave a small laugh and I felt a small tinge of relief. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but panic spread through me immediately. Her shoulder didn't feel right. It felt too hard. I pulled her towards me and screamed as her head fell from her shoulders. It wasn't Jess. It was a mannequin. I stared at its plastic head, where it had rolled to a stop at my feet. A wig sat a couple of inches away, styled to look exactly like Jess's hair. My heart sank. Had Jess turned into a mannequin? Dread bloomed through me as I came to the realization that I would probably never see my best friend again. I would never go on another road trip with her. I would never get to tell her how I really felt. I would never wake up in the morning to find her bundled up in that old armchair. She liked to drink coffee while she looked through the window that we could never get open, the sunrise illuminating her face. I snapped back to reality, shaking as I stared at the mannequin in front of me. Someone had dressed it exactly like Jess and left it up here for me to find. Who would do that, and why? Without thinking, I took a step back and then another, and then there was a loud crack and I was falling. Time seemed to slow as I fell, and it felt like I had been falling for a few minutes before I hit the surface of the water. Cold water rushed over me as I sank lower. No matter how hard I struggled to swim to the surface, something seemed to pull me lower. Frantically, I looked around me to see if there was anything I could grab onto, but the dark water swallowed any light the weird red sun gave off. When I could no longer hold my breath, I instinctively tried to suck in air, and realized that I could breathe. I stopped struggling as much as I tried to catch my breath. Next to me floated a plastic bag and a crumpled up soda can. The giant plastic rings from a six-pack floated over my head. The rings were somehow big enough to pass over my head and settle around my neck. I floated in the water, wondering what the hell was going on, when the plastic ring suddenly seemed to twist and pull. I started to choke and gasp for air as invisible hands seemed to pull the plastic around my throat. My hands flew to my throat to try and pull the plastic free, but it was wound tight around my throat. My vision blurred and I started to feel dizzy. A pressure had started to build in my head when I was finally able to tear the plastic free and I gulped in air. Relief washed over me, but only for a few seconds before the plastic bag found its way over my face and I started to suffocate again. This time, I was able to rip the plastic from my face before it got too bad. Netting snaked its way from somewhere beneath me and wrapped around one of my legs, trying to drag me further into the depths. I kicked and thrashed, trying desperately to break free. But the more I struggled, the more I seemed to sink lower and lower. Finally, the netting just seemed to let go. The plastic and trash around me seemed to sink lower and I was finally able to swim up. I broke the surface and I swam to the shore, coughing and sputtering. When I hauled myself out of the water, I realized that I was back at the park. A feeling of unease crept over me again. I shivered, but I wasn't sure if it was from the dread of being back there or the fact that I was soaking wet. I continued to cough and vomit off the water, but what startled me was something scraping the inside of my throat. Small, sharp, blood-covered bits of plastic laid in my vomit, but I couldn't remember swallowing anything.
Have a nice swim, Steph.
The mushroom mannequin stood over me, his voice sounding sweet and mocking, but there was something cold about it. "What the hell is going on here?" I coughed. "This used to be a nice place." "What happened to it?" I asked, glaring at her. "People happened. They threw their garbage everywhere except the trash cans. Most of it ended up in the river. The plastic took over." "So why me? Why Jess and Joey? Why are you doing this?" It didn't answer for a while. "You're never going to leave this place." "No!" I screamed as I ran for the car. I pulled my phone out to try and call the police before remembering that I had fallen in the water. But water damage wasn't the issue. My phone was now a plastic replica. I screamed as I threw it at the mannequin. It bounced off its torso and just landed in the grass. There was no reaction from either one. As I got to the car, I pulled frantically on the door, banging on the window. I could see Jess's phone in the cup holder where she had left it charging. I stopped as I realized in horror that the car wasn't an option anymore. "No," I muttered as I realized the car wasn't going to start. I wouldn't be able to drive it because it was plastic. My heart sank as I watched Jess's phone light up. A text had come through from her mom asking if we had made it home. When I looked up, the mannequin was gone. I took off running through the town, looking for a payphone or anything that I could use. I came to the police station and I wrenched the door open. The station was dimly lit, but spores floated through the air. Unsurprisingly, glowing mushrooms covered the desks and chairs of the station. I covered my nose and face with my elbow and I carefully made my way to the desks. I picked up a phone and I carefully brought the receiver to my ear. Plastic. I threw the phone down in rage and I tried the next one. Plastic. All of them were plastic. I stormed out of the police station, surveying the street and weighing my options. I could try some of the houses. I could look for a school or a hospital, maybe a grocery store. Maybe it would have some food. I was starting to feel hungry. No, I had to find a way out of here. I shook my head, trying to focus. Maybe I could try to walk back out the way that I came. Maybe I could ask the giant fish standing in the road. Wait, giant fish? Sure enough, there was a giant blue fish sitting in the road, its mouth hanging open, and its dead eyes staring at me. What? I wondered out loud. I looked around to see if anybody else had seen the fish, but of course, no one had, because I was in a deserted plastic town. I wandered past the fish who just turned and watched me go. The houses on either side of the road grew taller and taller, towering over me. I walked past a car that just stretched on and on as I walked. The pink and purple clouds in the sky twisted and swirled. A cartoonish image of a woman walked by and I tried to get her attention. Her hair blinked from brown to blonde to black. Her clothes flashed every color of the rainbow. "Hey, ma'am, what's going on?" I asked frantically. "Welcome to the show," she exclaimed, suddenly moving and bending like one of those wacky inflatable things at car dealerships. "What?" I asked, trying to reach out and steady her. My hands passed right through her, like she was a hologram or something. "We were so careless," she laughed. "Pretty soon, the whole town turned to plastic too, even the people." Everything was starting to look like a Technicolor fever dream. "Steph, hey!" A sing-song voice called out. What you doing over there? I looked to see who was talking. Between two houses ahead of me, a blue mushroom bounced up and down. It was 3 times as large as all the other mushrooms around town. "Follow me," it sang as it bounced away. I scrambled to follow it, almost tripping over my own feet. As I ran between the 2 houses, I saw it disappear behind a house up ahead. I was losing it. "Over here." It was now the next street over. Everything was starting to look cartoonish. I was in the middle of the street when I realized that I couldn't see or hear the mushroom anymore. But I was pretty sure there was a snake swimming high in the sky. "Behind you," a deep voice boomed. I turned to see the blue mushroom standing behind me, now 10 times its normal size. Its face was carved like a jack-o'-lantern. "You're going to die here," it growled, hopping towards me. The ground shook each time it landed on the pavement. I turned and ran, but it could hop farther than I could run. Before long, it landed in front of me. I skidded to a stop, trying to catch my breath. My heart was racing and I was starting to feel a little nauseous. My head felt bigger than it should have and full of pressure. "You're going to die here," it cackled at me. I tried to step backwards, but I fell and I landed on my back. Behind the mushroom, the clouds were still swirling. A face was growing across the angry red sun. No, not a face, but a head. It looked like a mannequin's face covered in spores. I watched as the spores grew into full-size mushrooms. "Over here," the sun said. I turned my head sideways, trying to see around the looming mushroom. "Hey, over here," I said. I turned to my right, and I saw the mushroom mannequin standing inside a grocery store. I ran inside. "What's happening?" I asked as I tripped over a shopping basket and fell over, taking down a display of plastic cereal boxes with me. "I tripped," I giggled. Suddenly, everything seemed so funny. I couldn't stop laughing. Everything was just so utterly, unbelievably absurd. "Yeah, you are." The mushroom on its legs started wiggling, and the mannequin shakily turned and started to hobble off towards the dark back end of the store. I laid on the ground and I looked up at the ceiling. Surprisingly, some of the lights blinked on, but instead of their usual fluorescent white light, they were yellow, pink, purple, green, and blue. The colors danced and swirled above me as I lay on the floor. I opened my eyes. The colorful lights were now dark again. Plastic cereal boxes were scattered around me. A headache was growing behind my eyes and my mouth was dry. I was starting to get dehydrated. Something told me that everything in the grocery store would be plastic though, including the water. And there was no way that I was drinking that black river water. My heart was still racing and I was still a little dizzy as I made my way over to the front doors of the grocery store. They were stuck in a permanent open position, probably because there was no viable technology to open and close them. Peering out into the street, I looked for the giant blue mushroom. It seemed to be gone. The sky was back to its non-swirly pinks and purples. I felt overly cautious of everything, and there was also no sign of the creepy mannequin. "I gotta get out of here," I said to myself. I decided to check one last thing. I made my way back over to the park, taking extra care to not disturb any more mushrooms. I didn't want to inhale any more spores and have another crazy trip. I took a deep breath and I went over to where I had left Joey. There was almost nothing left of him now. He was a skeleton lying in the grass, mushrooms growing between his bones. Choking back a couple tears, I reached for the cell phone that had sat next to him. Silently, I prayed as I pressed the home button. Nothing happened. The screen stayed dark. I cried out in frustration, and I threw the phone away from me. I sat and cried as despair overcame me. I was never going to get out of here. Jess, the girl that I was in love with, was dead. Her little brother, who I had watched grow up, was dead. I had no food and no water, and no way out of here. I was going to walk the empty streets of this weird plastic town for the rest of my existence. I felt exhausted. My energy drained from my grief and my earlier spore-induced trip, and my attack in the river. I wanted to go to bed, but I didn't want to sleep in the grass again. Instead, I decided to try one of the houses. If I was going to die here, I could at least do so in the comfort of a bed, right? I chose the houses closest to the park. The front door was unlocked. Inside, it was just a simple house, sparsely decorated. It reminded me of the interior of a dollhouse that I had had when I was younger. My feet felt heavy, and it made a hollow clomping noise as I made my way up the plastic staircase. Turning into the first bedroom, I stopped short. The bedroom was in fact laid out exactly the same as my childhood dollhouse. The only difference was a body lying in the bed, a polyester blanket pulled over it. Familiar mushroom spores spotted the blanket, and little mushroom caps were already starting to form. "Jess?" I asked shakily. I wasn't sure if I could handle another mannequin head falling off. I reached out and I touched her shoulder. She seemed to be breathing at least, but I wasn't sure what I could and I couldn't believe anymore. "Jess, wake up," I said, shaking her. She stirred slightly and opened her eyes. Jess blinked at me cautiously. I wasn't sure if this was really Jess or just another trick. "Steph, what's going on? Where are we?" She sat up, looking around warily. "We need to leave." I started trying to pull her out of the bed, but she brushed me off and stood up on her own. "Why does this look like the dollhouse that we used to play with?" "It doesn't matter, let's go," I said, grabbing her hand and pulling her back towards the stairs. There was no way that I was risking losing her again. "Do you have your keys?" She stopped walking and started checking her pockets. Her hands fumbled but then pulled something out of her jacket pocket. I found comfort in that familiar jingle. I led her out of the house and back towards the car. Somehow, it had turned back to metal, but I wasn't going to question it. "What about Joey? Where is he?" she asked, looking around. Only his switch still sat in the back seat. "He's not here," I simply answered, climbing into the car. "Just drive." "No, I want to know where my brother is," Jess insisted. I got back out of the car and I led her over to the skeleton lying in the grass. No, that's not Joey," Jess choked out, but I could tell that she knew that it was. Jess dropped to her knees, sobbing. She reached out to touch him, but I pulled her arm back. "Don't touch him," I murmured. The last thing I wanted was another bizarre trip. I glanced up to find the mushroom mannequin standing several yards away from us. It was standing in the tree line, partially obscured by branches. I waited for it to do something, but it just stood there, watching us. Once her crying grew softer, I gave her a few minutes to collect herself before pulling her up. I led her back to the car and I climbed in once again. Jess followed suit and picked up her phone. There were several missed calls and texts from her parents asking where we were and if we were okay. She put the phone down, obviously confused, reversed out of the parking spot and simply drove back the way that we had come in. Behind us, I could see the mushroom mannequin just standing there, its black eyes staring at us, while its luminous mushroom shimmered. Eventually, we found ourselves merging back onto the highway. The sky had faded back to its normal blue color. The sun was bright and yellow. I glanced up to look in the rearview mirror, but the exit that we had just come off of was gone. There was no ramp merging on, no signs indicating where we had come from. The clock on the dashboard read 7:03 a.m. Jess's phone showed the same time. All of the texts and missed calls from her parents were gone, but I was sure they had been there when we had got in the car. I shook my head again and I put the phone down. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that we were going home. I tried to ask Jess what had happened to her, if she had had any weird dreams while she slept, or if she remembered how she had gotten into the house. She just shook her head and refused to talk about it, which I guessed was fair because I wouldn't talk about Joey. Just drive, was the answer that I had given her each time she tried to ask where he was. I wasn't sure she would believe me if I told her. I wasn't sure if I believed any of it myself. All that mattered now was getting home. Nothing was going to stop us this time. There would be no more random exits or naps in the park. I instructed Jess to drive straight home. This would be the last time somebody talked me into driving straight through the night.